Welcome back, everybody, to On the Record, hosted by Dekel Bor and presented by Shure in association with Ropeadope right here. Each week, Dekel spends an hour with one of the greatest producers and engineers of our time. That's what the show is about. And they're going to dig into motivation and technique as well as life. Thanks to Shure for hosting this. Dekel Bor's recent release, Let Love Rule, was out in 2020. That's available at dekelbor.bandcamp.com. He has performed with many legends, Johnny Griffin, Reggie Workman, Pat Martino, Billy Hart, and more. Today we welcome a very special guest, producer, bass player, songwriter, engineer, Dave Darlington. Several Grammys with Wayne Shorter, Eddie Palmieri and Brian Lynch, and also again with Brian Lynch. And I think I might have missed one, but we'll talk about that. This man has over 1,000 album credits to his name, many of which are here on the wall at Ropeadope, and we're very thankful to have him here. He works in a wide variety of genres. This was notable to me, including J-pop. If you want to learn more, please go to davedarlington.com and check out that incredible roster. So we'll pass it over now to Berlin, Germany. Mr. Dekel Bor, how are you, sir? Good to see you.
I'm happy to see you. I'm happy to see you, Louis. So this one is, to say that it's extra, double extra special. It's such a gross understatement. I've been considering the gentleman at hand a mentor and a hero and even a friend for hopefully going on almost 20 years now, since I was a kid running around New York trying to get my guitar to sound a little better. I almost never succeeded, but I will say this. I forgot. So the reason we're here is I'm working on an album. This album came out recently. It's been doing beyond well, which I'm super excited about, mostly thanks to you guys. And I'm coming up with the next album and looking for all the feedback and the inspiration and the advice that I need. We used to just go to the gigs or go to the studio or visit Dave at Bass Hit or wherever, but with the world kind of going to a halt, we came up with this next best thing. So a couple of things about this album. It's the best I ever got to sound. It was mixed 3 times, all of them by Dave Darlington. It was mixed and mastered by Dave Darlington, like all albums I ever recorded. And I first came to hear of Dave through albums that I literally grew up on. We're talking about albums by Herbie Hancock, by Wayne Shorter, Sting, many people. And getting to work with him for the first time was a humbling experience to see someone who's a master of the craft be so casual and just charming about it. I literally learned tons. I never saw anyone get that great a sound for an acoustic guitar that quickly. It was like boom. So without further ado, Dave, I'm just so happy to see you. How are you?
Well, thanks, Dekel. Good to see you, and Louis too. And I hope I can live up to that build-up of an introduction. Wow, I'm blushing.
Let's find out. Let's find out. So, how's the family? Everybody's well?
Everybody's good. New York is kind of waking up now. And,
are you back at Bass Hit? Are you back working in the studio?
Actually, May was like 50-50. So all through the pandemic, it was a couple days a week of people who had to be there to sing or were from out of town or something, and we had to be together. Most of the pandemic mixing was, through audio, was remotely. And starting in May, I was in it like half of the week, three to 4 times a week. And June looks like I'll be there, back to the 5 days a week kind of thing like we used to do.
That must feel great after all the time.
Yeah, a lot of smaller studios, boutique studios didn't survive, and so it was kind of one of my, by hook or by crook, I'm going to still have Bass Hit at the end. After all these years, I have my collection that I'm very proud of, and and it's a space that everybody enjoys being in. You've been there. You can be there for a while, and you don't feel cramped and claustrophobic. So in the early pandemic, when it looked like, what are we going to do? And the landlord wasn't very helpful at all, because the landlords in New York just pulled down the curtain. Like, we can't talk about a rent break, because where does it stop?
Right.
You know, from their point of view, I can understand that, but that didn't help any of us who were paying these large
I have to
Manhattan
say
rents.
this though, that Bass Hit Studios for us, I mean, everybody in my age group and also the ones in their late 20s now, I mean, it's kind of like a haven for us. I mean, all the albums in the jazz scene, I mean, 99% of
Well,
them
you know, all
are
those
done
people you're
there.
talking about, all those
Lunar
people you're talking
Records,
about,
Ropeadope, Whirlwind, everybody's coming to you for all the right
you know,
reasons. It's done
all
none
those
such
people that
Warner.
all those people you're mentioning, you know, one friend tells another friend, and then they become my friends. So, you know, as soon as somebody comes in that I haven't met before, I was like, well, who's on your album? And they'll name this one. Oh yeah, he was on this other, you know, if I didn't do the album, I'd mix something that they played on. So, you know,
Absolutely.
there's a couple degrees of separation, but not much.
Absolutely. So I want to ask you a couple of things. What most people don't know is that now that you're the go-to engineer for mixing and mastering, I actually got to work with you when you were still tracking. I mean, I think it was like the last days that we would schlep to a studio. I mean, the favors that I owed you for those sessions. Um, so I'd like to talk about your decision-making process in choosing a studio, because I remember we spoke at this at length.
Right. It's sort of like those TV shows, you know, buying a lake house. Like, okay, this one has a view, but it doesn't have a deck. And this one has 3 bedrooms, but there's no view. So like all the studio and the studios in New York, there are less and less of the big ones. You know, when we made your first record, we had quite a few choices of
Right.
pretty good rooms, and everybody kept their mic collection well, and
I
the
remember you
console.
still, even with all that, you still brought some mics from home. That I
Of
remember.
course, yeah, yeah. Well, you know, you learn what works for you, and if you read biographies of great engineers, they'll say the same thing. You know, well, I finally put this on the oboe and it worked so well that then
Right.
that's what I always do, right? You know, so
Because you
so
have
I
to have that on the
at my
oboe.
age,
But
now, I have my shtick of microphones that I do, and I don't really want to experiment too much.
so
I'm
wait,
not
wait,
a
wait, wait. Before you're running away from this topic, when you're still, you don't do that anymore, but when you would schlep your own mics to a session, why is that? Do one mic differ from the other within the same model? I mean, are you used to the sound of those specific pieces?
Well, that's yes. There's an element of that. You know, not every U47 is great. Some are unbelievable, and some are not so good. They've had a lot of wear and tear, especially in the vintage category.
Right.
And then not every studio has the kind of mics that you like to use. You know, and depending on the genre, if it's rock, you might use one kind of overhead setup for the drums because it's going to be loud, and if it's jazz, you might use a different overhead setup because it's going to be more delicate. So you look on the website of the studio. Okay, they have this one and that one, and they have enough of these kind of mics to go around, and you know,
So for
you choose
anyone
it
who,
from the microphone and the console and the space that we're going to be in, and
right,
how can we be separated enough but glued together enough?
right.
Remember talking about that, like.
So let's talk separation since you just brought it up. Is it a generational thing to separate everything, or is it a matter of having options later at mixing, or is it a matter of how much of that has to do with actual tone?
Well, there's a certain sound of a record that's all in the room together, like the old jazz that
Van
people
Gelder
like.
stuff.
Yeah, Van Gelder had some separation. He used to shove the piano
Right.
mic right in the hole, you know, so it didn't get the drums. The hardest thing in those kind of records is when drums are leaking into other things, because then the drums sound distant and it's too much cymbals and too much of a low, roomy tone going on. You can't get the piano bright and clear because you'll bring up too many cymbals, you know.
Right.
So
Right.
But if you look at, there's pictures on the internet of them recording take 5, and the sax is blowing almost right into the piano.
Right.
There's like 4 of them in a 10 by 10 square foot area. That's the sound. The older jazz is a little roomier sounding than now, and that went through the fusion thing in the 70s and 80s when everything was real tight. So now you try to go for a little bit of a hybrid. If you're playing electric, I want you in the room with the bass and drums so you can feel them, but maybe would
But
lock
the
the
amp in
amp,
a room, yeah.
put the amp in a room, right? Put the horns in another room, but close enough to see everyone.
So since you just brought that up, we've been doing those live sessions with Jazz Times and Shure every week.
Yeah.
And we've been getting, I feel like we can get a better bass sound. It's basically a live session in my own studio. It's a big, you only see this part, but it's a pretty big
I saw
studio.
some pictures of it. Yeah.
And do we separate the bass? Like what's the next level instead of, I don't want to use too much DI. You don't want to do the,
Yeah,
we're
you don't
playing
want too
super
much
loud.
DI. So you want mics that are pretty directional, for one thing. So you could maybe even use a dynamic on the fingers. I don't know if you're using 2 mics.
Yeah.
You need a large condenser somewhere to get the
Right.
girth, or a ribbon, but a ribbon's bi-directional, so you're going to get the room and everybody else. So maybe in your case, a large condenser. Then what I would do is, go get a piece of plywood and put a blanket over it and some feet, and put it in between the bass and everybody else, so he could see over it, but the mics are behind the garden wall. It's not gonna completely isolate him, but at least the drums and cymbals are not going to be blowing into the bass mics.
And you would literally just put a 57 or 58 on the fretting hand?
Sure, absolutely.
Wow.
Why not? I mean, because first of all, they very much reject everything else. They're very directional and close, right? Or any dynamic that's like that. But sure, I use 57s on a lot of different things. We were talking about recording guitar. You can't record a guitar amp without, even if it's in tandem with other mics, you have to have a 57.
The truth is, I don't think it's because we aren't sure. Every time in my experience that we recorded guitar in my life, every time they want to put this or that or the other, and 9 out of 10 times the Shure is really going to be all I need. I mean, it's
Pretty
going to be
much
5% of something.
It's the same thing for snare drums. I've seen people use 414s in hypercardioid, and then they tape a 57 to a small condenser, like a KM84 or something, and then now we have 3. We have 1 underneath and 2 on top. But you know what? It's the 57, man. It's almost always is, right?
Right.
And I was recording a drummer the other day, and he was like, "They're using 57s on toms." And he had 4 toms, so I only had 3 57s on the 3 higher ones, and the 414 was on the floor tom. And he came back to listen to his playback, and he was like, "Man, you're right. The 57 sound better than the 414. I would have never believed that." But there's something about those dynamics that get that chesty thing,
I always think about the Max Weinberg sound when I think about a 57 on drums.
Of course, yeah. And he's whacking.
How many mics are too many mics on a drum set?
Depending on how many toms, I top it out at 8 if I can. So kick snare, underneath the snare hi-hat, those, and 2 really great overheads. That's your basic thing. And then individual toms. On a jazz kit, that's usually only 2 toms anyway, right? Rack tom and a floor tom. So that's 8. If he's got more toms and he wants to do a bunch of fills, I'll put up, more. I rarely, unless I'm in a room that's unbelievably gorgeous, like Avatar, let's say, Berkeley Power Station now.
Yeah.
Which is a beautiful room. Then I'll record the room. My little room at Bass Hit is not big enough to develop that rock kit. So there's not much really a point in doing a room. Some people like a mono overhead, or the Glyn Johns, 1 over, 1 on the side, 1 in front of the kick. There's that, you can do that. But mostly what I record is either jazz or clean pop, and they want it clean and they want it tight. So eight for me is enough to control. I have enough control over everything, and that's it.
So,
The real trick is the quality of the overheads,
so
because
what are your favorite overheads? Give
I'm
me
using
a
Sheps
spiel.
CMCs on the overhead for jazz. I'm using U67s on the overhead for rock. Sometimes a ribbon pair, some Coles or some Royers, if it's warm and I don't need the brightness. But the Sheps are just so good, as you know. That's what we used on your acoustic, and they're so honest. You just really hear. Somebody said, "Man, I can taste my cymbals." It's
Right,
like,
right,
yeah,
right.
I know, because that's what they sound like. They sound like what this mic is getting.
So now that I'm recording on my own with, sometimes I would get some help from someone, and I'm not getting the sound that I want out of the acoustic guitar. And I've seen you do that. I mean, it was like a millisecond. And we spent 2 hours. We kind of get like a decent thing happening. What are some of your go-to techniques for recording nylon or steel string acoustic?
So my nylon steel thing came from Clark Germain, who I think you probably know maybe through
Of
Bob,
course.
and that he got it from Alan Sides, which is the
Hmm.
Ocean Way guy. And what they do is they treat the strings of a guitar like a piano. So you mic it. If I'm looking at you, I'm coming down on the low E and I'm coming up on the high E at a 90-degree angle, and they're both equidistant from the guitar. So the sound is arriving there, and they're equidistant up and down the neck. And then you turn your neck. You start at the 12th fret or maybe the shoulder. And then I tell the player, listen in your headphones and play,
Find your
and then
place.
go like
I
this
remember it. Find
until
your
until
place.
until it sounds as sweet as can be. And now maybe I might put a large condenser down at the bottom end of the on the other side of the hole, just in case.
Almost behind the
No,
thing.
not no in front. They have to all be equidistant from the source, because you don't want the sound arriving at different times. That's in any multi-miking thing like drums. The sound has to arrive at the same time to all these mics, or you're actually hurting yourself. So on a drum kit, you draw an imaginary line between the kick and snare.
I actually see people going and measuring with measuring tapes.
I don't measure. I mean, I measure with my eyes.
Right.
So, but I mainly want my overheads to be equidistant between that imaginary line that cuts through the kick and snare, because in a record, the kick and snare is in the middle, and then the cymbals are wide. And so we don't want more snare drum on the left cymbal than we have on the right cymbal. It doesn't make sense. Same with the guitar. The two upper and lower mics. Oh, I didn't finish about the guitar. So then we record those two, and then we pan them. So your low E string is in my left ear and your high E string is in my right ear, and maybe not completely 100% wide, but we have this big panoramic, gorgeous sounding guitar, and it's easy to make things smaller. It's harder to make them bigger, right?
Well, I'm not gonna go there right now. But
Yeah.
and these mics, you like them to match? You mismatch them? What's
No,
your
I
favorite?
match usually a stereo pair. Sheps would be a good choice for that. KSM,
You told me
the
you just
Shures.
tried the ones that the 81s, the Shure 81s that you liked them.
Yeah, I just did the same exact technique with the SM81s. They sounded beautiful.
And it's
And
the
I was
same
going to say
steel
those are those
string
are
as well
those
as
are
nylon?
particularly robust. They're kind of designed for stage use as well as studio use. So I was a little thinking, well, they're maybe just built like tanks, but they maybe don't sound good. But they sounded great. I mean, the frequency response was beautiful.
I really think that I kind of like things to sound robust as well. I'm thinking
Yeah.
that the cool jazz of the LA scene in the 50s is kind of gone in a minute. But so next question. So we're still choosing studios. So you're
Okay.
looking for a nice big room.
Looking for the beautiful room with sight lines and enough separation for what we need, whatever that may be. I'm thinking back to a Tom Harrell album where we knew he was going to replay everything, but he was also conducting. So he would come out to the podium, count everything off, and then he would run into a booth and slam the door.
Right.
and play along with everyone, knowing that we were going to.
That's the one with the strings, right?
Yeah, and woodwinds, and it worked out very well. But we needed a room where he could get physically to the podium and back to the booth, and everybody could see him, and then we could lock away the drums. And you have to lock away certain things, the bass if
Right.
you can, and but you want the woodwinds and strings to kind of be together, right? You want that lush.
Yeah.
Fortunately, in New York, there's fewer and fewer places that you can do that. There's getting to be more out of town. If you drive 45 minutes to an hour, there's Sound on Sound in Montclair in New Jersey, and some upstate New York, and then some in Connecticut. But in New York City proper, there's really the Berkeley, which we used to be Power Station, and
Shure is still
and
happening?
Shure is still great for that. Although they don't have super high ceilings, but they have an incredible mic collection and an incredible board.
Yeah, great
And
board.
an incredible staff. You also need the staff that knows the room and has the right demeanor. You can't have somebody who's telling jokes to Aretha Franklin when she's there. They have to know the etiquette of how it works, and unfortunately there's no way to really teach. There's no learning that anymore. Everybody's doing it on their laptop, but they're not getting the etiquette part of it. Like
So
when do you answer the producer if he asks you a question? He doesn't want to hear your thoughts about the beat. He wants to know
I
if you
just
have
did a
English breakfast
session
teeth.
where I was shocked by the etiquette or lack of it. I was
Yeah,
shocked.
lack of it. And it can bring the session down. It's like the reason there's etiquette is to get the work done and get the most out of the talent that's there. That's why you don't speak out of turn.
So speaking of getting the most out of the talent, what does that mean to you as far as the way you behave in a studio?
Okay,
Because I'm
there's a
thinking that you still have those moments sometimes. I mean, you're a bass player.
Yeah.
So you still have those moments where you go, oh my God, this is Ron Carter, or this is Sting, or this is...
I'm not going to lie. I'm a fan. The first time Ron Carter came to Bass Hit to record, I prepped for like 2-3 hours before he got there. It was just a bass, just two mics. But, he's been a hero of mine since, when I was in college was when all those CTI albums were coming out once a week. Every week there was a new album with Ron Carter on it. But, and one minute it's real jazz, the next minute it's fusiony jazz, and the next minute it's bossa nova, and he was covering it. So, I was a fanboy. But the trick is with any of them, you treat them with respect and deference, but as a working peer. Like I know you're gonna take care of the bass, and I'm gonna take care of the recording. And it's my pleasure to meet you. It's just so exciting that you're here. Is there anything I can do to make it better for you? And then he chills out, and then he sees that you're completely ready. You've got all the cues marked that he wants, and your sound is ready to go. And is everything okay with the headphones? Do you need some water? No, let's go. Usually guys like that are all business. Let's go. I'm here. I know the part. Let's go. So what? And then the same happened with Sting and all those people.
But I know from mutual admirers that both of these people they consider you a friend now. Absolutely.
Yeah. When COVID hit, Ron had just finished a vinyl record for Record Store Day, which I'm sure Louis knows all about. You make special vinyls for Record Store Day because people go to the record store. So Ron did this thing with the quartet with Renee Rosnes in Amsterdam. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Amsterdam, I believe he recorded, and it was mixed and pressed in Germany. And it's 180 gram vinyl, like the real deal, right? So I think they made 1,000. The label gave him 100 numbered, and he goes, "Dave, are you still coming in the city?" He calls me. He said, "Dave, are you still coming in the city?" I said, "Yeah, even though it's COVID, I'm coming in once in a while." He said, "You got to stop by. I got something for you." And I'm thinking about this guy does nothing but give me gifts. He got a new pickup, David Gage pickup, and he called me to the Blue Note and presented me with his old pickup. My Juzek has Ron Carter's X pickup on my bridge. So that's a little side story. So now he's calling me during COVID. Can you come by? It's like, what can I bring Ron Carter that he doesn't already have? I'm racking my brain. A coffee table book about the Miles years? No, he's got those already.
He was there.
So,
he was there.
So I finally go to my New Jersey bagel spot, which is actually quite good, and I buy a dozen bagels. So I go to Ron's place. I go to the doorman. I said, Dr. Carter is expecting me. He calls him up. He says, okay, it's Dave. Yeah, okay, I'm going to put something on the elevator. I tell the doorman, well, I've got these. So I put the bag of bagels, 13 bagels on the elevator, and they go up, and it comes down, and here's a signed numbered vinyl, like number 19 or something. So I'm one of the 100 friends of his.
He's a real audiophile, Ron. A real
audiophile. Well, that's why because we always talk about that when we're together. Like, hey, have you bought anything new for your stereo? And I've spent some hours listening to his stereo with him, and it's totally amazing. But then he called me. I'm driving home in the car, and I knew he didn't want to be bothered. He had a Zoom lesson, and he called me and said, yeah, thanks for the buns, man. Those are going to be good. Wow. I'm like, thanks for the vinyl and the autograph.
It's kind of unbelievable how quickly Ron pivoted to social media. Is creating playlists. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Well, the pivot thing is central to any successful.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
If you think about all the guys that you've read Herbie's book about he wrote Watermelon Man because of the way the watermelon guy pushed down the street when he was growing up in Chicago. He moved to New York, and now he's with Miles, and then that ended, and now he's an electronic composer and a film composer. You have to be always ready and always open for the opportunities that are going to fall out of the sky with no warning whatsoever, right? Me being an engineer instead of a bass player was just serendipity mostly, and just being being ready for it and being around it, going, this is cool, and I think I know how to do this too. In fact, I think I can do it better than the guy that's doing it over there. I don't like the way that sounds, and with the kind of music that you play, I just feel like that pivot. Everybody that I think about the Billy Strayhorn book, right? He's delivering for the pharmacy, and they love him because he plays the piano to entertain everybody after he gives them the prescription. And one of the guys is the impresario of the big band hall in Pittsburgh. He goes, come on down next week. It's it's Count Basie.
Right.
Count Basie's coming. So Billy's goes, I'll be there. I'll be there. And he gets sick. He can't go. Guy says, don't worry. The next week he's delivering again. Don't worry. This week it's Duke Ellington. Just come on down. So now Billy meets Duke Ellington. Duke says, here's my address. It's uptown. Take the A train, and then I'll see you when you're in New York. Now he's on a school trip in his senior year of high school to New York as a tourist. He's got, I have to write something for Mr. Ellington. He told me I have to bring him a gift. And he looked at the address, and how to get there. Take the A train uptown to Harlem. The rest is history. But if he had gone to see Count Basie,
who knows?
Who knows?
Absolutely.
Right? If Herbie wrote The Prisoner because somebody said, "Hey, have you ever done that before?" He's like, "I don't know, but I think I could do it."
Actually, speaking of vinyl, I just got The Prisoner on the Tone Poet series. That sounds really, really good.
Really good, right? I love that stuff.
Yeah.
But my point is, unless you're the kind of person who wants to go to veterinarian school and you love animals and you want to be a veterinarian, you invest that 7 or 8 years in college and you open up your veterinary shop, and that's a great life. That's wonderful.
But that's not so much more than those 7, 8 years. I just invested those 7, 8 years today practicing.
Right. But also we don't have that security of that kind of like income that there's always going to be sick dogs and cats. We have to learn to pivot on the seat of our pants and scuffle and just be ready. This opportunity didn't work out, but this one panned out. So maybe we do more of that.
Yeah.
Right. And as long as you can enjoy it and be creative and feel like it has value for you and what you want to do. So that was my point. It's just being ready to pivot and accepting the serendipity.
If there's any time to learn that lesson, is to learn that this year, I would say.
Of course. Who survived and who didn't, and how difficult it was for a lot of people. I mean, the symphony in New York has been out of business for a year. The symphony is on a little stipend, I believe. I'm not really privy to all this, but I think the Met Orchestra is just out of work, because the Met is much more expensive to mount a production than a symphony concert, right? I mean, you know, your father, so you know the symphony life and what that means to those guys.
Yeah. So I don't know if should I bite on this thing that you just threw out?
What's that?
Symphonies and my dad and there's something about a cultural heritage and a cultural belonging.
Yeah.
And that I think now that I've been spending most of this past year, actually couple of years, thinking, what's the actual mission here? What am I really doing? And I think a cultural, if you can get to a point with your music or with your art that it resonates with people in real time in an honest and authentic way.
Well, that's a really, that sentence right there sums up everything. I mean, nobody can really cares if you can play 14/16. You have to connect. So if I'm mixing hip hop, I'm trying to connect with that audience who loves that music. If I'm mixing J-pop, I'm trying to connect with that audience, you know, the bubbly, happy, trebly. And if I'm mixing acoustic jazz, you know, I'm trying to connect with all the people who love Fred Hirsch and that tactile jazz. If I'm doing hard jazz, maybe I want a little more, you know, the aggressive people who like to crank it up. So the point you're saying about making music that's important in that way, that it's connecting with people, not important because it's difficult or important because it's challenging or you're writing about a dream you had, that's all valid. I'm not invalidating that, but the most important thing is that it connects with some audience somewhere.
So for you as a listener, because I can picture you at the desk about to mix something, you click play for the first time on the Pro Tools sessions. What needs to happen in order for you to emotionally connect with what you're listening to?
First, I try to make all the instruments as beautiful as they can be. And in that way, I mean, if it's acoustic jazz, make them beautifully acoustically. If it's hip hop, make that snare, you know, and the kick drum move your guts, you know, so that the individuals.
Before you move forward, because you're moving too fast for me.
Okay.
So let's say it's a rock band. It's 5 guys in a room, or if it's a jazz quartet. You once told me that you're looking for as least possible compression and thing in the mix. So what does that leave us with the right mic placement?
The placement is when it's recorded, of course. That's the first thing. Sometimes you can move that mic, you know, on your speaker, on your amp. If you move it 3/4 of an inch towards the edge, it's brighter. Right?
So you still do that? I mean, if you would be tracking, you still advise the guys to go and spend the extra few hours and move those mics above the drums?
Not necessarily hours, because before the hours are before the musicians get there. And then you have the kind of the rhythm section is kind of placed because there's pretty standard ways to make the way I do my pianos and the way I do my guitar amps, the way I do my drums. And then you have to see the guy's setup and see what he's got. You have to make friends with the horn players, because what young engineers have to realize is these players, what they have as their wealth is their tone. That's their wealth. They're not millionaires. They have that sound. This is my sound, my tenor, my alto, my soprano, my guitar, my bass. So you have to make friends with them and say, I'm your ally. Oops, dismiss.
Happens to me all the time.
Decline. Sorry about that.
No, but I feel the same way about what you're saying, but go on, please.
So you become the ally of the alto player who you never met before and say, hey man, you know, I love the way it's sounding right now. And I think the mic should kind of go here. What do you think about that? And I kind of care what he thinks, but I kind of don't, because I know what I think.
Right.
I think it should go here, but I want him to be involved in the decision making.
And what do someone like me do, or someone who's watching right now, and they go to a session, and it happened to me way too many times where I have this engineer, he's in a room, he's not even in a room with me, he doesn't even know what my amp sounds like. He just like, play for me. Then he says he needs more blah blah blah, but he doesn't even hear what.
No, you have to come out. You have to
like.
come out and listen in the room. I mean, all the great engineers would say that. You know, Al Schmidt, Bruce Swedien, you know, Jeff Emmerich. They all go out and they listen to the players and what kind of tone are you getting? Are you happy with that tone on the amp? Because if you're happy with it, then I'm going to try to catch that in the control room the way I'm hearing it right here. That's the trick.
I'm so happy you're saying this.
You know, because otherwise, why don't I just set the amp? Why don't I tell you how much treble it should? No, that's not
right.
what I do. I don't do that. Right. I make records. You make guitar sounds. So, you know, you're going to set the amp so it's pleasant, it's pleasing to you, and it makes you want to play. And then you have to hear that in your headphones too, that sound, right? If you're working with others and you need to hear them, and you also need to hear your tone. So, you know, we have to get that sound through the board, into the record, and then, you know, into your headphones. So you're grooving. You know, I love it when the drummer says, wow, you know, whatever that reverb is you got on my snare, I love that. You know, or, you know, man, I've never heard my bass so clear. I had Patitucci in the other day, man. Very simple. You know, 67 Coles, no DI. And he's like, yeah, man. So we're off to the races. No, you know, no 2 hours of, you know, how's the bass tone? What if you move it in? You know, I'm a bass player, and, you know, it goes here. And it has to be so that the sound of the bass hits both mics at the same time. One is focused on where he's plucking, and one is focused on where the wood is producing the bass sound, which is in the middle of the bridge, a little bit out, right? Like a cigar box with strings.
Well, I think you know you're speaking out of your own experience, but it's not common knowledge anymore, Dave. I was mentored by Jim Hall, who would always tell me that he would always record and it would never get his sound right. I mean,
that's a drag.
Yeah. But you just mentioned reverb on drums. What are your favorite reverb? The first question is, how much reverb is too much reverb? How do you go about it?
Well, that's a personal thing. I always tell people reverb is like pepper. How much pepper do you like in your soup, right? Some people, as soon as I put the reverb on the horn, they're like, it's, you know, they want that really old dry thing. And then somebody says, you know, if you listen to, I mean, I use certain examples of people who've made a lot of money in music. For example, Chris Bodie, right? Very wet and dreamy. Pat Metheny, very wet, reverb and delay, right? So this.
Give me some more examples.
Kenny G.
Right.
You may not love the music, but it's wet and warm and hugging, and people love it, right? And then, you know, but if I put Pat Metheny reverb on Pat Martino, I'd be fired.
Right.
Because that's not his thing. That's not his sound. You know, so you like that goes back to like, who's the audience here? You know, Metheny's audience is probably a younger demographic than Martino, maybe, or less traditional, shall we say?
So, when you're mixing, or when you're mixing the album, is there like you mentioned to me once that the first 90% of the mix you go to like this. It's like you've done quickly. This over 1,000 records, 30 years. It's just, you're just there, and then getting
one of the songs on the Wayne Shorter album is the rough mix that we had 15 minutes left and was on the Neve. He said, and Bob says, Dave, you know, throw it up. We got a great overdub, you know, just throw it up and let's, you know, get it sounding pretty good. And we put it on DAT back in the day, which was digital, so it didn't lose any quality. And then we tried to mix it again and again and again on another desk. And Bob would always go, why don't you put that DAT of the rough mix in and let's just see where we are. And the rough mix would always blow away the 12-hour, you know, $2,000 in the studio mix. And then finally, after 3 tries, he said, you know what? I love that rough mix. We're never going to beat it. Let's use it.
That's the last track. She wore
I don't
the.
remember which song it is. I just know that, and if you ask Bob, he'll agree. He'll remember that too. That we
I
finally
just
just
got that on vinyl as well, just because I had
yeah.
to have it.
But like we were talking earlier before we went on the air about the somebody was talking to me about psychological processes of first order and second order, right? So, for example, driving on an expressway, you know, an interstate highway, there's certain things you do. You know, you maintain your speed, you stay in your lines, and you know, you notice your surroundings, you're waiting for your exit, but you can pretty much zone out, right? That's called a first order operation. And then the second order operation is, it takes more of your immediate attention, the tuning in the radio, looking at the GPS, talking on the phone, whatever that may be. So that 80 percentile mix to me is at this point, now this took a long time, it wasn't always this way, but at this point, it's a first order operation. I just go, those cymbals sound too dull.
So
That snare
before
drum
you go
sounds,
there, you place everything. I mean, walk me through what's happening. You're placing everything
well,
at 0 levels?
no, I'm pushing up the faders. First of all, usually nowadays you're getting a rough mix because they're working in a software. So
Right.
you're getting a little bit of a panning. They've got some panning going on. They might even have some reverb and all that. I don't usually pay too much attention to what reverbs they had. I do pay attention to their balances. And then the first thing I do is just go through and balance by instrument. You know, the drum kit as one thing, the bass, 2 mics of the bass as one thing, the 4 piano mics as one thing. And I get the band sounding proportional, shall we say. Then I take maybe 30 minutes to sculpt through the individual instrument sounds by themselves. How loud should the tom-toms be? Are the tom-toms ringing in any way that we have to get rid of? I don't often go through and mute the in between the tom-tom fills unless it's a rock record. I would do that on rock. I wouldn't do that on jazz because the acousticness of the kit is part of the vibe.
Yeah.
Right? But you
Besides,
don't want a bunch of tubbiness in your overheads. It's just murking things up, you
and
know.
at this point, we still have no compression, no EQ.
No compression, no EQ. I mean, if we don't have to, I mean, I might roll off I might filter some bottom out of maybe the overheads, for example. Even the bass, you know, acoustic bass tends to be very thumpy with microphones. So, you know, you don't want that sound. The low E on a bass is 40-ish, 41, I think. So you don't want 20 and 30 hertz really in your bass. That's interfering with your kick drum. So I, you know, maybe filter out some of that stuff. If the piano's in the room with the drums, we might filter up the bottom of the piano. So, you know, it's a case by case basis, but you know, you kind of dial up the tone so it should be. And then a lot of the work on a mix is coming in the bus, right? Like if the mix sounds balanced, but it maybe sounds a little too tubby, why don't you just cut out a little 300 of the whole mix? What's wrong with that? You do it on your stereo. If you put on an album from the 60s and it sounds dull, you go crank up the treble. So why not treat the whole bus as an entity, right?
Right.
A lot of times things build up around 200 and 300 and stuff like that. Everybody, why is my mix so muddy? And they carve it out of everything individually, and then everything sounds thin. But maybe you just need to carve it out of the sum.
The whole thing, huh?
Yeah, kind of.
I just saw someone put compression on the bus, and I was like, "Wow, that's the first time I've seen
You
that."
know, that comes from back in the day. The boards had compressors, or
Right.
the manufacturers made bus compressors. The Neve 33609, and the Manley variable mu is meant to be a bus compressor or a vocal compressor, and the SSL had the one
Right.
that you see, the one space rack thing that you see. So the engineers would we could get our mixes a little more aggressive before mastering.
Right.
So mastering guys they're usually not compressing, they're usually limiting, meaning there's a dead stop so you can just bring the whole volume up. So that's different than compression where you're evening out the dynamics of the piece. So, you know, I've oftentimes gone to mastering from the analog days and been heartbroken because once they put that limiter on, everything changes, right?
Right.
Now you can listen without it, and then you can put it on and listen with it.
So me being just a tone freak, um, what are we gaining and what are we losing in moving to digital? Because I remember you just mentioned the Wayne Shore album that was recorded to that, and I have it on vinyl, and I swear to God, it sounds better on vinyl with
Okay.
with a digital source. So
Yeah, it's a digital source, of course. At the end of the day, we mastered it. We mastered it from tape to digital. You know, the digital got a bad rap in the early days because the sampling rate was not well understood, and the filters that it's a lot of physics involved, which I'm not really an expert about. But I know there were filters that rolled up super highs because of aliasing and stuff. And then the Apogee company was the first company that I know of that made third-party filters that you could add to your rig.
I remember we did a session once, and you told me, "Well, you gotta have the converter. Get the Apogee
Yeah,
converter. You have to have that.
yeah,
Let's
yeah.
rent it out."
Yeah, we did. From the very well, I worked in a studio in New York that had bought a Mitsubishi 32-track digital tape machine. It was very new. Like, wow, this is so cool, digital. And the Mitsubishi filters didn't sound good, so he sent the guy from Apogee to install Apogee filters in the Mitsubishi. So that was the first time I'd heard of it, and that actually sounded great. And when you were making DATs back in the day, you would have an Apogee converter going to the DAT because the DAT machine's converter wasn't so great.
Right.
So you used the Apogee and then digitally into the DAT. And then you could start the multi-track with Apogee with the AD8000, the purple one, and then the
Right.
DA16X, and now I have a Symphony. I even, you see my rig at home here. I have a Universal Audio, which is very good. But if I have to print something critical, I go to base hit where the Symphony is because that's my clock. And that's my listening, and my last tweaks are always going to be on.
I
on the
got
Symphony.
I got the ensemble based on your recommendation. Yeah.
Yeah, and you like the sound of it, right? So
well, it's me playing, so but so,
that bad rap about digital is it's kind of moot nowadays because everything is so much better. We've been digital now since I don't know 80 something, 89 or 90, and
89-ish, yeah.
Pro Tools has been the de facto since 95, 96. That's almost 20 years, 20, 30 years now. Yeah. 25 years. Okay. So, and they keep improving it, and the plugins are less taxing, and they're also they're better 32-bit floating computation.
So,
it's all math inside those digital things.
Since you just brought up plugins, what are your takes for plugins versus outboard when you're mixing, mastering?
So I use outboard when I'm recording, the real outboard. The LA2A, or maybe I'm always recording through Neves or APIs. I have enough in my studio to record a band through them. No offense to the manufacturers of the clones, but I have the real ones. I know they're doing their best with the clones and the Carnhill transformers and the center. But let me ask you something: would you be happy dating a clone of your girlfriend?
I can tell you that in the guitar business, it's super fashionable to make guitars that look like old guitars now.
I know about that. I know. Oh, here's a country gentleman, but it's something else.
Exactly,
right?
Exactly.
What the hell is this?
But I just I started working with this guy who is a genius at finding old wood or guitars that were destroyed and kind of rebuilding them.
Well, yeah,
and
the Jaco bass is a famous one of those.
Really?
The fretless bass was in pieces, and they put it back together, and it sounds great now.
Wow, the one that the guy from Metallica is playing?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
but I know what you mean, and I don't mean any disrespect to Brent Averill and Vintech, and those are amazing products. But I remember
I had a couple of very, very, very expensive guitars, and then I played some old guitars. They're not perfectly in tune. It's not perfect like this.
They're quirky.
Like that.
They're weird.
But it just gets you that sound that you grew up on listening.
I remember when the Chinese microphones started showing up. You could. So a friend of mine was like, "We're going to make some Chinese U47s, and they're going to be less than $1,000." And I was at Avatar. and the producer got the mic. Here it is. Let's set it up. He was partnering with the head engineer at Avatar, who's a brilliant engineer, and he's Roy Hendrickson.
Right.
And so Roy Hendrickson and my friend Kosugi-san made a deal in China to make like 100 of these mics. So there's a bass player who had a little room at Avatar named Jerry Barnes. He's a killing R&B singer. So Jerry, come on in and sing. And he sang, and it sounded great. And he heard it in headphones. He goes, "Man, that sounds really good, but there's some kind of mojo about the real one, isn't there?" And then he left. And the vibe in the room just went,
right.
Because you agree. Even though they had invested all this time and money, they knew in their heart of hearts that it wasn't the sound of a U-47. It just wasn't. It was good. It was great. It probably had the same frequency graph.
I just got home from the studio a few days ago and I told my girlfriend that I think that I need to sell something. We need to find something to sell because I found those early 60s Gibson pickups, originals, and I think it will make an umpteenth of a difference.
Yeah, of course.
But the truth, you said something to me ages ago that I found to be the gold standard, which is in many things when it comes to recording music, you get what you pay for.
Yeah. I've never regretted buying real Neves. My first preamp purchase was a Focusrite Blue, back when Focusrite was making consoles. So I have a pair of ISA 30s, and I was very young. This guy was selling them? Should I get them? And I talked to a couple of older guys. Focusrite, that's Rupert Neve, and they're great. And they're kind of like the Avalon. Very beautiful but very clear. No color. And then my second purchase was a pair of Neves from Mercenary Audio that Fletcher went through and cleaned up for me and everything. And it's, man, that's a lot of money, man. And what am I ever going to make that money back? I made that money back by a million. And that's a big lesson, right? I mean, there's a reason people are not playing Silvertone guitars. Silvertone guitars are cool, but they're not L5s. You know what I mean? They're just not.
Right.
So,
So few golden questions.
I've never regretted good mics and good mic pre's. Or, even good instruments, a good piano, like invest in a Steinway, invest in a Yamaha or whatever it is that you like, You're never going to regret it. It's not going to go down in value.
Absolutely. Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
A Neve is going to go up. A Vintech, I'm not so sure about. And a Samson or something, a digital Samson, this or that or the other is worth. I mean, I have so many old digital boxes that are completely worthless. Not even, you can't even give them away on Reverb.
Right.
Because there's no demand for that. Digital. When you think about those digital, go ahead.
Speaking of digital, so you track to outboard, but when you mix and master, it's mostly plugins?
Almost all, yeah. Pretty much 100%, yeah.
What are your favorite reverbs?
I have quite a few. I mean, I use H-Verb with Waves. I use Revibe from Pro Tools, Avid. I like the Valhalla stuff. Seventh Heaven, which is like a Bricasti. The UAD EMTs, the 250. The Abbey Road plates from Waves I use. Depends on the application. I have a template with 50 reverbs, and I just go load this in from the template. I need this right now. Wheel it in like a catering. Right. So yeah, and I use the Waves imitations of LA2A and 1176 that came from Chris Lord-Alge, the Puig Tech from Jack Joseph Puig, as my compressors.
What was the one you said that's like a Bricasti? Seventh Heaven?
Seventh Heaven, yeah, is one of the Bricastis. There's a Slate version of that in the Slate Reverb. There's a Bricasti, and Audio Ease Altiverb has great Bricasti samples. The Bricasti has a certain kind of tone, and you can dial up concert Gabau in Amsterdam or Berlin Symphony Hall. It's really amazing.
Fantastic. I wrote all this
So
down, just so you know.
okay, so the reason I'm in the box is A, for storage and recallability. Like if we wanted to go back to your album, I could call it up 5 years from now and it'd sound the same, right? Because all the reverbs and everything are still there. If I don't have that same exact compressor outboard, or if it's aged or if it's gotten some static in it somehow, we're screwed. So there's that. The storage and the recallability is very fast.
So, last 2, 3 questions, 4 or 5 or 6
We just
questions.
got started. We just got started.
Right. So, are there any albums that for you are you live by, as far as what would be a dream sound of what would be the absolute best Dave Darlington sound? You when on the
You mean
when
of
you reach
mine
the
or of
pearly
somebody else?
gates and they want to see, but Dave, what do you sound like? You say, well, let me give you those 3 albums that for people that want to get the Darlington
Of
part.
mine. You mean of ones that I did?
Absolutely.
Well, Allegria was probably number one.
Why is that?
First of all, it's Wayne Shorter, and a quarter note of Wayne Shorter to me is $1 million note. And there's so many cool tricks that Robert made us do. We recorded Wayne as soon as he got in, so that the intro to the whole album is just him noodling. It's not
Yeah.
even intentional. You know the story. And I'm proud of the way when I
I
put it on now. I'm proud of
I
the way
heard
it
a
sounds.
story that when you guys worked on Herbie Hancock's Gershwin World, the intro to the album is just the percussion players warming up before he gets to the studio. And then he comes in and he plays like this one chord, and that's the intro.
I don't know. Well, that's sort of the story of Allegria, where Wayne is noodling around on some other song, and Bob took it and put it at the beginning of the album. My involvement in the Gershwin's world was after Swedin. Swedin was only booked for X amount of time because he was expensive, and Bob was, out of money, but he wasn't happy with the balances. So I consulted with Bob. Bruce left his gear there, and Bob rebalanced the record with me as that sounds better. No, that doesn't sound better. That's really a consultant at the final end. So my involvement in Gershwin's world was not so heavy, but in Allegria, I mixed the whole album and recorded
And
a
tracked,
third of it.
yeah,
Tracked a third of it, I would say.
the East Coast stuff.
Yeah. So, I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud of Miles at the Fillmore, the box set, which was only an 8-track thing, but I love that music, and I was coming of age during that time in the 70s.
Absolutely.
So I just love hearing them morph from one song to
I
another.
always felt that band had the kind of fire that
Unbelievable.
almost never. I mean, when people say that jazz brings them to sleep, I just put the Filmer, your mix of the Filmer thing, and I'm like, you try to sleep now.
Yeah. Well,
What's what?
first of all, they're all a little nutty, right? Miles is a notorious nut, and Jack DeJohnette, who was young and fiery. Airto's on another planet, and he was going for it.
Are
And
we
he was,
talking about? Are we talking about being drugged out of their mind, or just?
No. Just like, yeah, let that enthusiasm of playing. They were young lions at the time. And it was electric. So Miles had something to prove. It was like when Dylan went electric, every boo.
Right.
Miles was becoming a rock star at the Fillmore right before our eyes, with Airto and DeJohnette and Dave Holland.
What is it like to open the tracks and hear the rough? I mean,
oh man, it was well. First of all, it's 8 tracks, so everybody's mono drums, mono percussion, mono bass. Let me think about this. 2 keyboards. What am I missing? 2 horns and the audience. Those were the 8 tracks.
Right.
And the 2 horn mics are kind of like left and right on stage, and Miles is wandering around. So the trumpet solo would, it's on mic 1 right now. No, he's moving. Here it comes. It's on mic 2. So we did a lot of tricky rides to get it right. But it's just it's the best content. The content is so much a part of it. Same with Allegria. So I don't know what the third one would be. The Sting one I'm very proud of, but music is Chris. It's only it's Christmas in Elizabethan England, so it doesn't have a broad.
I have to tell honestly, Dave. I think we just now that I've been getting into vinyl. I've been driving you crazy with the vinyl thing for a few years now, but I've gotten a few of the classics things and the original pressing and trying to get them to stand up. And I think it's my favorite Sting album for a few reasons. A is you get a very, very intimate part of who he is on that album that you don't get.
There's a little bit of a story behind that, so we're using Clark Germain's 47, which is a very special 47. Then Robert and Sting decide no pop filter. So he's singing up on the 47, even the loud song, Soul Cake, Soul, no pop filter. So my job was to go and get all those P's and B's out. That took weeks. But when we played it for the record company and the management, we had a listening party at Clinton.
That took weeks to get the thing
to get
out.
all the P's and the B's. I had to go out and cut them, take 100 hertz and down away from those moments without the vowel, but not hurt the vowel. Just get the consonant, the plosive. But when the record company, Universal, and his manager and Sting were all there in Clinton and were playing it loud, they were like, I never heard Sting's voice sound like that. So his part of what you're saying of who he is not only the material, but the way he's singing on that. And so I would say I'm proud of that. And recently some gospel people came in the other day and said, oh, you did that album with Soul Cake. They knew the song. I'm like, wow, really? Right. You know that song? Yeah. So
who told me that he loved that album? Wolf Mueller, that worked at Universal at the time. You know Wolf?
Yes, of course. Yeah. Well, I'm very happy to hear that because I don't circulate in the audience that much to know who likes that. I mean, obviously it's Sting, so you're happy that he called you his friend and took pictures with you and stuff. He's like, I grew up near a town called Darlington. Did you know that? I guess there is a Darlington, England nearby where he's from, right? So proud to have worked on that for sure.
And now we have those three lined up, 3 albums that you as a music fan serve as a model for you as far as unbelievable tracking, mixing, mastering. Just as a fan, you put it on and you said, oh, this is...
Well, the Weather Report 1, which is just called Weather Report.
Right, on ECM.
So Wayne is blowing into the piano and Joe is holding down chords. And then the engineer, after he blows the note, the engineer is, you know that Milky Way? I mean, that album blew my mind. And I used to take my girlfriend up into the library at college and borrow it and put it on. Like, you got to hear this. It's unbelievable.
Wow.
What else? Silent Way from that era. Silent Way.
Silent Way, as far as the tone of the album, as far as the way it sounds?
I think it's more about the content, because when I was younger, I wasn't thinking in terms of engineering and what the tone was so much, but the music is moving to me.
Yeah.
I used to put that on college. I used to put that on the automatic turntable and let it lull me to sleep, and it would go off after I would be like every night I went to sleep in a silent way. Jack Johnson, which is like a jam session, with the badass Mahavishnu tone of life on that album, right?
Yeah.
Gang girl, like, whoa, shoot. I mean, I love some of the Bernstein recordings of the Schumann symphonies. I think are awesome.
Wow.
From the Philharmonic, all of the Deutsche Grammophon, the Von Karajan, Brahms. The guys that really do it better than anybody else. Those kind of recordings are amazing to me. I'm trying to just think off the top. Oh. Some of the Glyn Johns recordings of in the classic rock genre, like Won't Get Fooled Again. I have the multi-track of that, right? So there's an acoustic guitar. Tip my hat to the new concert. There's a beautiful silvery acoustic guitar.
I just spoke to a mutual friend of ours. I mean, last week, and he goes, "So I'm trying to remix my own version of this U2 album," and I'm like, "How do you get?"
we
The
trade
open
those.
Pro Tools files.
Yeah, if you want some, I have a lot of great ones. They're really fun. You see how the other guys did it and what they were doing and what they were thinking
Right,
about.
right. That's
Yeah,
actually an important lesson. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely a
yeah.
very important lesson. That's a very important lesson.
So yeah, man. But it's really the content always first, and then the sonic part of it is how you present. That's the framework. How do you present it? Like, is it in high def and a big widescreen TV, or is it on a little shitty black and white TV in the corner of Woolworths? It's the same content, and the music is always going to be good if the music is good, but the mixing and the mastering can make it more enjoyable.
I remember you once told me, it's really the last thing, and I'm going to let you go back to the next Grammy.
The Pro Tools behind me.
Right. You once told me that you always like to double check a mix on the cheapest thing.
You can see them right here. That's a Japanese radio from the 1990s. And then I don't know if you can see over here, there's like a Bluetooth, like an Alexa. It's a Bose. But yeah, and nowadays with the audio movers plugin, you can broadcast to your phone from the control room. You just put this audio movers on the master and it sends it out to the web, and then you type in the URL and now it's playing on your phone. So you can immediately hear how it's going to be degraded by the iPhone.
Wow.
So yeah, I depend on those. Right behind me are my 5, the 2 crappy radios, the NS10s, the Genel X, and then the Sony 7506. Those are if I get it right.
7506? Let me write that down.
Phil Ramone was the original champion of those, and now they're in every mastering studio on the planet because they're brutally honest. Everybody puts them on, after listening on speakers, they go, oh, it's so bright. Yeah, but that's what's really there, because they have that frequency extension.
I have to tell you that now that I have some years of experience of tracking and recording and mixing, I have enough honesty in my life. I was just tracking. I know what it sounds like. Don't give me the honest mix. I have enough of that.
But you can hear things that you don't necessarily pick up on speakers, like thumping in the piano pedal and stuff like that you would need to maybe get out because it's not musical. So, or harshness up in the high end.
You get that in the headphones.
Yeah.
So last question, sir.
Go.
How loud or how soft do you mix or master at volume?
I listen very modestly. I don't listen minuscule soft, but I listen like we're talking right now. I mean, I turn it up once in a while, but the room and the speakers and everything change their reactions with more volume. So, the lower you listen, you're taking more of that room quotient out of things. So, a comfortable volume. And then sometimes I listen quite low to hear, what's really the loudest thing in the record, what transients are really coming through on the record when it's really, really soft. But, the crappy radios, mono, check everything in mono to make sure you're not anything out of phase, that stuff.
Wow. I can't believe I've never heard that before.
Never heard to check it in mono?
No, ever.
Oh, yeah. Because, if something's out of phase, it sounds nice and wide, particularly in headphones. But in mono, they'll cancel each other out and they won't be there.
Wow.
So if you have if your 2 background singers are out, if you have a double background that's out of phase, sounds great in headphones. When you listen in mono, you're only going to hear the reverb because they're completely canceling. This guy's trying to move forward and this guy's trying to move backward, and then vice versa. So the sum is 0. So you got to be careful.
Since you just brought this up, what is the phenomenon of having 2 mere decent mic sounds, let's say on my amp?
Yeah.
I put 2 mics, they sound okay. I blend them together, they sound amazing. What happens?
Right. Well, because each kind of mic, a condenser and a ribbon and a dynamic, there's a different science going on of how the wave is captured, right? Whether it's rattling inside a fixed magnet or whether the magnet is an electronic magnet and it's plastic vibrating in between. So a ribbon mic doesn't doesn't go up and down the frequency range the same as a condenser mic or the same as a dynamic mic. So it's great on a source that's static, like an amp, because you can put them in place and the sound of the speaker is going to hit them. What it's not good on, and this is a big mistake that a lot of people are making now, is horns. Because, the soprano sounds great on the condenser, but, let's put a ribbon because it'll be fatter. That's great. If the guy never moves in the whole time he plays that 60 minutes of music, he can't move. Like a piano doesn't move, right? An amplifier doesn't move. A drum doesn't move. As well, a cymbal moves, but the drum doesn't. You never see John Coltrane playing into two microphones. You never see Miles Davis playing into two microphones, because you're introducing more problems than you're solving.
Yeah, nowadays
as you go up and down the
when I see Coltrane nowadays, he's just using plugins and he's doing all MIDI. So,
but I sometimes I get I just recorded my soprano. There's the AKG and the Neumann and the ribbon, and we took 2 room pairs. I'm like, okay. And your point would be, like, did you play well? Is it exciting? Right. Is it beautiful, the playing? Because I can make it sound any way you want. If the ribbon is, if the condenser is thin, we'll warm it up somehow. But when you start mixing the ribbon and the condenser, it's great at C2, and it's out of phase at C3. Or it's great when you're standing in the front, but when you tipped your head back and did that riff, now they're out of phase. So what am I supposed to do? Have an automated phase timer? So when you tip back, all of a sudden I'm slowing down the ribbon? It's impossible.
And you usually correct those phases with a trim plugin?
The time align, the time plugin.
So is there a plugin for you that you can correct the phase of this whole last year to just cancel itself out? Is there something about that?
Well, I use Sound Radix time align, auto align it's called, which listens to your whatever you want to be the main, like your overheads or your snare, and it listens to the tom, and it says, okay, the tom is 23 samples later. That mic, when he's whacking the snare on 2 and 4, that tom is late. So I'm going to move that tom 23 samples. It's like minuscule. Now, both of those mics are hitting you in the eyeball at the same time. Instead of bidow, they're going blow. And the tom-tom fill is not late. It doesn't mess up the tom-tom fill. In fact, the tom-tom fill is now in line with the snare mic. All the 8 drum mics are hitting you right between the eyes instead of
Dave Darlington.
Drizzling on you.
You are a never-ending universe of things that can only be learned by.
I bet you we could find 5 guys that would disagree with me easily on the internet. I'm sure.
Well,
but this is how I.
They don't have the world Grammys. They don't have the Grammys on the wall, Dave. So when they will, Dave, you've been a hero of mine, a mentor, a friend.
Likewise, bro. It's so good to see you. I love you too, man.
Already.
I'm so proud that your album is doing so well, even in pandemic. It just goes to show you, you're doing the right thing.
I remember sending you 3 tracks. We only had 3.
I remember.
And I'm sending you, does this make any sense at all? And you brought it back, and it's, Dave, thank you so much for making it sound so much better than I actually do. And God willing, if everything goes as planned, I'll see you in January. I can give you a hug in the real world.
So, man, thanks to Shure Company and to Ropeadope and Lewis, we're together.
Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Great.
Send our love to the family. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.